All right, everyone, we do have a couple of polls for presidential approval right now, Trump's approval, that include part of the period post-Ukraine whistleblower, so-called. They show no statistical movement whatsoever, really, with regards to Trump's approval. I wouldn't be surprised to see this continue to be the case. The fact is that Trump is in a position where he's not capable, I think, at this point, of getting his approval that much higher than it is. But at the same time, you've got a lot of people who, I think, they're looking at the economy, they're looking at the relatively peaceful diplomatic situation in the world. They're looking at the Democrats as the freak show they are, and they're saying fundamentally they support Trump. And keep in mind, his approval right now is not that dissimilar from what Obama's was at this same point in his presidency. What happened with Obama is he got reelected in part. His opponent was weak, although not as weak as some of the Democrats could be, so that's an advantage Trump potentially. Romney was a weak candidate. The economy was kind of sort of recovering at the time, but there was a malaise. It was a very, very funny race because there was a sense of malaise on both sides. Here's what you got. Obama had suffered attrition for the first few years. He had swept in as the golden boy who was going to correct all the bad things in the world and change we can believe in, blah, blah, blah. And that didn't really happen, and Mitt Romney picked away at that, but Mitt Romney wasn't really offering anything fundamentally different. The Democrats this time around may be offering something substantially different. The problem is, if it's Biden, he's offering you a return to Obama. I'm not sure how well that'll go over. If it's Warren or Sanders, they're offering socialism. That's not going to go over well either. So you got a situation where the alternative may be considered so unpalatable by the center that they just default to Trump. If his approval remains roughly the same, if it's in the mid-40s or thereabouts, he probably gets reelected. I don't think, some people said, well, the magic number is 47. That's the lowest his approval can be to get reelected, just like Obama's was. In the Electoral College, I don't think it was that close. I think he could probably be a little bit lower. You see, the state results actually mattered. Trump doesn't need to worry about the general election vote as far as the popular vote goes. We all know he's going to lose millions of extra votes in California. It doesn't matter. Who fucking gives a shit? Nobody cares. He's talking about competing in Minnesota. I think that's actually a pretty damn good strategy. People may think it's a long shot. Look, they thought it was a long shot all along that Trump would even be nominated, let alone become president. Do you remember election night where the little New York Times meter there said 99% chance of a Hillary Clinton presidency, and then it slowly moved the other way throughout the night until people got very nervous, and it was pretty funny. I can't wait for election night. At this point, I don't even care if Trump wins. I'm just getting into the political analysis. You've got to understand, as a nonpartisan who's not part of Trump's core fan base, I'm not a hardened supporter. I don't really care if the Democrats do win. Largely, I see obstruction if they do, but I don't think it's likely. What candidate are they going to put up against him? His approval doesn't go down to any considerable degree, despite the fact that an impeachment inquiry is now on the table. And it's blowing up already in Pelosi's face. Aren't they about to go out for recess for a couple of weeks or something, and that gets tabled in the meantime? You couldn't think of a more fumbled situation. The Democrats finally get what looked like it could at least be kind of a scandal. They could have run with it, and they could have cast Trump as, here's corruption. Instead of an inquiry, they could have just gone to the public, used the corporate media, and said, look, he's corrupt. He's literally corrupt. Here's the evidence. In the court of public opinion, Trump probably would have lost. They didn't do that. Instead, they jumped the gun. They started their inquiry. They put Schiff at the fore. They take an opportunistic, mush-mouthed goofball, put him at the fore, knowing that there's a 99% chance he fumbles. He fumbles real fucking bad, and now they look like shit. It's pretty great. Trump probably will be reelected. Yeah, he'll probably be a two-termer. Not even because he's been such a great president. I mean, some of the signature legislation he wanted to push through has been continuously obstructed. It's not a loss for him because he's at least trying, but it's not exactly a victory. There's been a huge amount of obstruction, including among some Republicans, and he's fighting an uphill battle to even accomplish anything. But when you look at the end of the day at what he has accomplished, at least for his base, he did, the VA overhaul was first, and it was, a fairly minor issue, a throwaway, but it does matter. VA overhaul, I don't see any complaints about the VA from the last few years. I'm going to take that as evidence that the overhaul at least more or less worked. The wall has been retrofitted. Our border wall is being improved and expanded. belatedly and at a slower pace than it should have been, but it is there. I have no doubt that he'll be able to campaign on that, at least in part, come the general election. Tax relief, which in part was aimed towards the middle class, people like me especially. The self-employment tax restructuring was great. You can write off up to 20% of the general tax rate if you're deriving it as self-employed income. If it's above a certain threshold and below a certain other. It's kind of arbitrary, but for the self-employed middle class, huge windfall, great. We're talking thousands of dollars back in these people's pockets. Very, very important. When you look at that, take that and match it up against what the Democrats are offering. Biden's offering, hey, Obama 2.0. Well, I don't know how well that'll go over. Warren and Sanders are offering socialism in two different flavors. Buttigieg, who probably can't be nominated anyway, he's basically, well, what Biden said. So it's basically the same thing. And then you've got Kamala Harris routing him out. She's no longer viable. I don't think any of them can really go toe-to-toe with Trump, especially Biden. He's the front runner with the most name recognition and the most corporate cash, fundamentally cannot beat Donald Trump. I think it would be a total wash. It would be a hellish maelstrom of slaughter for the Democrats, the likes of which you'd never see again. With Warren or Sanders, they might fare better, but I think they would still lose. When Trump can face an impeachment inquiry over something that definitely damages Biden too, but it mainly was aimed at Trump by the corporate media, and it doesn't really decline his support in any seeming sense, that's a testament to the hardened base that he's got. His hardened core of support is at least a third of the U.S. population. It is extremely large and it is extremely hardened. It's not a majority, but it gives him an enormous advantage over any of the Democrats. None of them have that particular advantage. That's about all. Peace out.